Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Julian Parker had always thought of himself as a balanced man. He worked as a financial consultant, ran his own small business, and handled numbers and strategies with the same calmness he brought to his personal life. Married to Heather for 6 years, he believed that, even with the natural wear and tear of any relationship, they'd built something solid. Heather was an event manager, charismatic and communicative, always wrapped up in projects that demanded creativity and long work hours. Julian admired her dedication and never questioned the nights she came home late, the weekends filled with corporate events, or the occasional trips to conferences. After all, trust was the foundation of everything. Or at least that's what he believed, until that Thursday in March that changed everything. Julian was at his office, reviewing a client's spreadsheets, when his phone buzzed. It was an Instagram notification, a message from someone he didn't know. The profile picture was generic, no face, just an abstract icon. He almost ignored it, but something made him open it. The message was blunt, no beating around the bush, your marriage is a lie. She's been cheating on you with her boss for months. If you want proof, follow me back. Julian's stomach turned. His first reaction was anger. Who was this person? Why would someone do this? Was it a cruel joke, an attempt to destabilize him, some kind of emotional scam? But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and he knew he wouldn't be able to simply ignore it. He grabbed his personal phone, created a fake profile with a random name and a landscape photo, and followed the mysterious account. In less than 5 minutes, a reply came, a series of screenshots of text conversations. They were messages between Heather and someone saved in her phone as Cameron. The exchanges were explicit, leaving no room for interpretation: plans to meet at hotels, declarations of desire, carefully timed rendezvous. Julian read everything 2-3 times, as if hoping the words would somehow change meaning. But they didn't. Each sentence felt like a stab. Heather was saying things to Cameron that she hadn't said to him in years, talking about excitement, urgency, how she could barely wait to see him again. Julian closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt something inside him break. He wasn't the kind of man who waited, who held on to suspicions to deal with later, or who coldly plotted over weeks. Julian operated on impulse, on the need for immediate resolution. If something was broken, he had to either fix it or throw it away. He couldn't live with uncertainty. He pulled up the shared Google Calendar they kept and checked Heather's schedule. That very night, she had a business dinner set for 8 o'clock. He felt the irony burn in his throat. How many of those dinners had actually been real? How many times had she lied straight to his face, kissed his forehead, and told him she'd be back soon? Julian left the office without telling anyone. He got in his car and drove straight to Thomas Brennan's office, a lawyer and college friend he'd kept in occasional touch with. Thomas was surprised by the sudden visit, but one look at Julian's face told him something serious was going on. They sat down, and Julian told him everything, showing him the screenshots on his phone. Thomas listened in silence, then sighed. "Are you sure you want to go through with this today? Sometimes it's better to take a breath and think things through calmly." Julian shook his head firmly. "No, Tom. I need to know the full truth. Today. Right now. What do I do?" Thomas explained that, legally, Julian would need solid evidence if he wanted a divorce without complications. Messages from a third party were a start, but ideally he'd need direct access to the conversations, emails, anything that proved the affair beyond doubt. Julian thought for a few seconds. He had access to Heather's laptop at home. They'd always shared passwords, there had never been secrets. Or at least that's what he'd believed. He thanked his friend, promised to keep him updated, and headed back home with a cold determination he didn't even recognize in himself. When he got there, the house was empty. Heather was still at the office. Julian went straight upstairs to the bedroom, grabbed her laptop from the desk, and turned it on. The password was the same as always, their wedding date. He felt a pang of bitterness as he typed in those numbers, which now seemed like a cruel joke. He logged into her email and started searching. It didn't take long. There was a folder labeled Personal Files, hidden among other work folders. Inside were dozens of emails exchanged with Cameron Matthews. The conversation started professionally but quickly turned intimate: hotel reservations, photos he couldn't bring himself to fully open, messages coordinating times, places, and excuses each would give their spouses. Julian copied everything onto a flash drive. Each file saved felt like sealing a coffin. Then he checked her phone photos, which automatically synced to the cloud. He found images that confirmed it all: her and Cameron at restaurants, in hotel lobbies, hugging, laughing, clearly intimate. Julian printed the most relevant ones on the color printer they kept in the home office. He placed everything into a large manila envelope, organized chronologically, as if assembling a dossier. And then he waited. Heather arrived around 7 that evening. He heard her key turn in the lock, the door open, and her familiar footsteps climbing the stairs. She walked into the bedroom smiling, tossed her bag onto the chair, and said she'd take a quick shower before heading out. "Dinner's not until 8, but you know how traffic gets." Julian just nodded, pretending to be focused on his phone. Heather picked out clean clothes, chose a lingerie set he knew she reserved for special occasions, and went into the bathroom. He heard the shower turn on, the water falling, and sat there on the edge of the bed, the envelope in his hands, trying to steady his breathing. 20 minutes later, Heather stepped out of the shower. She was wrapped in her fluffy white robe, a towel tied around her damp hair, her face flushed from the steam. She saw him sitting there, motionless, and smiled. "Honey, are you okay? You seem kind of distant today." Julian lifted the envelope, holding it with both hands. "Before you leave, I think you need to see something." Heather frowned, puzzled. "What is it?" He held out the envelope. "Open it." Heather took the envelope, still confused. She opened the flap, pulled out the papers, and froze. The photos were right there, vivid, clear. Her and Cameron entering a hotel. Kissing in a parking lot. Walking out hand in hand. She slowly flipped through the pages, as if unable to process what she was seeing. Her face lost all color. Her hands began to tremble. She let the envelope slip from her fingers, scattering the photos across the rug. "Julian. Where did you get this?" He let out a dry, joyless laugh. "That doesn't matter. What matters is what's in these photos. Or are you going to tell me it's all fake?" Heather opened her mouth, tried to speak, but no sound came out. Then, in a weak, almost pleading voice, she said, "I can explain." Julian stood up, crossed his arms, and looked her straight in the eyes with such intensity that she took a step back. "Oh, you can explain? Great. Then explain to me how you ended up planning to sleep with your boss in the same hotel where we spent our honeymoon. What's that about? Nostalgia? A tribute to old times?" Heather started to cry. Tears streamed down her face, still damp from the shower. "Julian, please, it's not that simple. I was confused. Cameron, he pressured me. I didn't know how to say no. It was a rough time. I wasn't doing well." Julian gave another bitter laugh, shaking his head. "A rough time? Funny, I thought we were doing fine." "But apparently, fine for you means having a husband at home and a lover at the office. And about the pressure. Heather, I read every single message. You weren't pressured. You planned it. You arranged it. You told him you could barely wait. So don't come at me with this victim act, it doesn't hold up." She tried to move closer, reached out to touch his arm, but Julian stepped back. "Don't touch me." His voice was firm, leaving no room for negotiation. Heather sobbed, desperate. Julian, I made a mistake. I know I did. But we can get through this. We have history. We can go to therapy, talk it out, figure out what went wrong. I still love you. Julian closed his eyes for a second, as if her words physically hurt. Then he opened them and replied, Love? You still love me? That's interesting. Because someone who loves you doesn't do this. Someone who loves you doesn't spend months lying, deceiving, building a whole secret life. You know the difference between a mistake and a choice, Heather? A mistake is tripping. You planned it, carried it out, and repeated it. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. And you chose him. Heather dropped to her knees, clutching her robe like a life jacket. I chose wrong. I know. But I can change. I can prove it to you. Just give me one chance. Just one. Julian took a deep breath, walked over to the dresser, grabbed a folder he'd stored there, and came back. I already spoke to a lawyer today. I copied everything, emails, messages, photos. It's all documented. The divorce process starts first thing tomorrow morning. You have until the end of the week to move out of this house. And before you ask, no, there's no negotiation. No second chance. It's over. Heather's crying grew louder. She tried to speak through her sobs, but the words came out jumbled and meaningless. Julian continued, relentless. And there's one more thing you should know. I sent anonymous copies of all this to the HR department at your company. A relationship between a supervisor and a subordinate, breach of trust, possible favoritism, that violates your internal policies, right? Let's see what happens when the board finds out. Heather's eyes widened in horror. You didn't do that. Julian, you couldn't have. That'll destroy my career. It'll ruin Cameron's too. We could lose everything. Julian shrugged, coldly. You should have thought of that sooner. And by the way, don't include me in that, we. You and Cameron can figure it out yourselves. You made your choices. Now deal with the consequences. Heather tried to stand, stumbled, and grabbed the edge of the bed for support. Julian, I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose everything. You can't do this to me. He looked at her with an expression that mixed pain and contempt. I'm not doing anything to you, Heather. You did this to yourself. I'm just making sure the truth comes out. And you know what's saddest of all? I really loved you. Truly. I believed every word you said. And you turned all of that into a lie. Julian grabbed his jacket and car keys and headed for the door. Heather followed him, still barefoot, her robe barely tied. Where are you going? He stopped and turned to face her one last time. To a hotel. Because I can't stay here tonight. I'll come back tomorrow to get my things. And you use this time to figure out how you're going to explain all this to Cameron once he realizes you're both screwed. In the days that followed, the chaos Julian had anticipated came to pass. The company's HR department received the anonymous envelope with all the evidence. Both Heather and Cameron were called in for separate meetings. Confronted with the proof, they both tried to downplay it, but it was too late. The company had a strict policy on relationships between supervisors and subordinates, especially when trust was broken and favoritism was suspected. Cameron, fearing he'd lose his CEO position and the reputation he'd built over the years, made a move Heather never expected. He pinned all the blame on her. In a meeting with the board, Cameron claimed Heather had seduced him, that she'd been persistent, that he tried to resist but eventually gave in during moments of weakness. He said he deeply regretted it, that he was going through personal issues, and while he took responsibility for poor judgment, he insisted he'd never given Heather any professional advantages. Internal investigations found no concrete evidence of favoritism, but both were deemed to have acted inappropriately. Cameron received a formal warning and was required to undergo compliance training. Heather, however, was demoted, transferred to an unimportant administrative role, and placed in a position where everyone knew what had happened. The humiliation was devastating. Heather, who once walked the hallways with confidence, now avoided eye contact. Conversations would stop when she approached. Whispered comments, muffled laughter, all of it made the environment unbearable day by day. She tried talking to Cameron, demanding some kind of support or at least honesty, but he avoided her. When she finally cornered him in a hallway, he was blunt. "Heather, I have a family, a career, responsibilities. What happened between us was a mistake. I need to move on, and so should you." She felt the sting of a double betrayal. Not only had she lost her husband, but also the man she'd risked everything for. 3 weeks later, Heather resigned. She couldn't bear the weight of stares, the drop in status, the constant feeling of being judged. She left the company without a farewell party or speeches, just a box of her personal belongings and a sense of emptiness that seemed endless. Her divorce from Julian was swift. He didn't budge on anything. The house was in his name, as were most of their assets. Heather walked away with little more than her clothes and a few worthless pieces of furniture. She moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, far from the tidy suburb where they'd lived, and began job hunting in a market that was harsh and unforgiving to someone with a tarnished reputation. Julian, on the other hand, found strength in his pain that he didn't know he had. The first few days were the hardest, waking up alone, returning to an empty house, facing memories that haunted every corner. But he refused to fall apart. He threw himself into work with renewed intensity. His clients noticed the difference, and results followed. He expanded his business, hired 2 new consultants, and took on bigger projects. Slowly, his social life returned. Friends who drifted away during the marriage reappeared. He went back to places he enjoyed, picked up old hobbies, and allowed himself to live without the weight of betrayal. 6 months after the divorce, Julian met Melissa, an architect who worked in the same office building. They'd pass each other in the elevator, exchange polite smiles, until one day she struck up a conversation. They grabbed coffee, then another, and soon they were having dinner together. Melissa was different from Heather, calmer, more honest, no games. Julian wasn't in a rush, but he wasn't afraid either. He allowed himself to try again, this time with more maturity and fewer illusions. One Saturday in October, Julian was at the grocery store picking up groceries when he spotted a familiar figure in the dairy aisle. It was Heather. She wore simple clothes, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, pushing a nearly empty cart. She looked tired, aged, as if the past months had taken a heavy toll. Their eyes met. She stopped, hesitated, then took a few steps toward him. "Hi, Julian." Her voice was soft, almost shy. He responded with a polite nod. "Hi, Heather." She swallowed hard, fidgeted with her hands nervously. You look good." Julian nodded. "I am. I hope you are too." An awkward silence followed. Heather seemed like she wanted to say more, maybe apologize again, maybe try to open a door that had long been shut. But Julian didn't give her the chance. He felt no anger, no resentment, just indifference. "I've got to go. Take care." And he pushed his cart away without looking back. Heather stood there, gripping her empty cart, watching Julian disappear down the aisles. She felt the weight of everything she'd lost, the comfortable home, the stability, the man who'd truly loved her. Cameron had vanished from her life the moment everything fell apart. Mutual friends had sided with Julian. Her own family, disappointed, kept their distance. And here she was, alone in a grocery store, facing the emptiness she'd created herself. Julian left the store, loaded his groceries into the car, and smiled to himself. It wasn't a smile of revenge, but of peace. He'd moved on. He'd chosen self-respect, rebuilding, moving forward. The betrayal that could have destroyed him had instead pushed him toward a better version of himself. Heather, meanwhile, kept carrying the weight of the choices she'd made. The present she'd never learned to value was now just a bitter memory of what could have been, but which she'd thrown away herself. The message was clear, not written in words, but in outcomes. Trust is a rare gift, and once broken, it rarely mends. Julian learned that dignity isn't negotiable. Heather learned that some choices come with prices too high to pay. And life, relentless and fair in its own way, demanded from each exactly what they deserved. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.